Welcome. Welcome and thank you for joining the 2024 Dr. Malcolm Peete Lectureship delivered by the gifted changemaker Abia Akram. And a very special welcome to the family and friends of Malcolm Peete. My name is Stephanie Nixon. I am Vice Dean of Health Sciences and Director of the School of Rehabilitation Therapy at Queen's University. I am joining you today from Queen's University in the city now known as Kingston, Ontario, which is situated on traditional Indigenous territory, and specifically Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. I am deeply grateful to live, learn, and play as an uninvited guest upon these traditional lands. Acknowledging this territory is one way of recognizing its longer history, one predating the establishment of the earliest European colonies. It's also to acknowledge this territory's significance for the Indigenous peoples who lived, and importantly, continue to live upon it, and whose practices and spiritualities were tied to the land and continue to develop in relationship to the territory and its other inhabitants like me today. This territory is included in an agreement called the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was made between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and Allied Nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes, one of which is just outside our door. The Kingston Indigenous community continues to reflect the area's Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee roots. There's also significant Métis community, as well as other First Peoples from across Turtle Island present here today. So here's why, one of the reasons why it matters so much to open in this way. Recognizing the powerful force of colonization, historically and present day, right now, is crucial for all of us for building a more just and inclusive future, including the ways colonial thinking frames disability as a problem to be fixed, as opposed to the beautiful and far more generative lessons I'm learning from Indigenous colleagues and friends about disability as difference. And it's the work of people like me, a settler on these lands, to come to understand my unique role as part of the wider movement for change. Our session today is going to help me in that learning. And so I turn it over to the director of the International Center for Community-Based Rehabilitation for the Advancement of Community-Based Rehabilitation, ICACVR, Dr. Heather Aldersey, to take us forward. Heather, over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you for starting us in such a good way. I'd like to echo Stephanie in warmly welcoming everyone to the 6th Annual Malcolm Peete Lectureship in Community-Based Rehabilitation. My name is Heather Aldersey, and I am the Scientific Director of the ICACBR, which was created in 1991 by Dr. Malcolm Peete. Malcolm devoted his life to promoting and implementing community-based rehabilitation throughout the world, and he did that really right up until he passed in 2017. And his legacy lives on in many ways, including through this lectureship. Malcolm's friends and family established the Dr. Malcolm Peete Lectureship as one way to honor his legacy, and now we're happy to offer this 6th annual lectureship today. I'd like to thank all the donors of the Peete Lectureship Fund for making this event possible, and it's through your support that we are able to come here together today. I'd also like to welcome all of Malcolm's friends and family, particularly Fiona Valliere, Malcolm's daughter. It is truly a privilege, Fiona, to honor Malcolm's legacy with you here today. To give an overview of what the lecture is going to look like, in a moment I'll hand the mic over to Abia Akram, who will speak to us for approximately 30 minutes, after which time we'll have a 15-minute Q&A period. But please feel free to type all of your questions into the chat as they arise, and we can bring them to Abia's attention when the speaking is over. And I want to note that this lecture is being recorded and will be shared with those who are unable to join us for the live event today, and it'll also be posted on the ICACBR website. I also wanted to draw your attention to the fact that there is closed captioning enabled for anyone who does need closed captioning. If you just hover your mouse over at the bottom of the Zoom screen, you should be able to see something that says show captions. So without further ado, it's my great honor to introduce Ms. Abia Akram. Ms. Akram has been engaged in activities of the disability movement since 1997. Among her many honors and roles, she is trustee for the Sight Savers UK Board and a member of the Council on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in the Ministry of Human Rights. In her role as gender advisor to the Commission on the Rights of Women with Disabilities, she has been lobbying parliamentarians and UN high-level representatives to raise awareness, network, and build capacity for disability inclusion. She's been instrumental in the development and implementation of legislation such as the Disability Rights Act of 2020 and the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. She also coordinates efforts to include persons with disabilities in the implementation of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals and has worked in more than 30 countries around the world. Akram completed her postgraduate degree in Gender and International Development from the University of Warwick, and today she will speak to us about celebrating diversity and inclusion in development and humanitarian response discourse. Welcome, Abia.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for giving me the opportunity. And thanks to all the listeners who are present today in this session today. Thank you to Dr. McQuaid. It's so honored and really hugely important discussion today, because when we talk of the community-based inclusive development, the main goal of the achievement is how we are engaging the communities. What are the good practices? What are the challenges that persons with disabilities are facing every day in their life? I think this is a great honor for me to talk in this session and also engaging all the stakeholders in the conversation, because when we talk about the academic perspective, it's really difficult to address the persons with disabilities and especially women with disabilities in the global south, what kind of challenges they are facing and how they are trying to change the discourse from the development and the humanitarian response into the celebrations. Because it took me almost 2 decades to talk about the disability rights. When we started talking about disability, people were saying it's a medical concern only, so we don't need to talk in the policies, in the legislation. It's a medical perspective, so need to be discussed in the hospitals. Then we started thinking like it's not possible only to discuss the disability from the rehabilitation or the medical perspective. It's important to talk about the community's perspective as well. And then we started discussing and end up in the charity-based organizations that, okay, if persons with disabilities are engaged in the community, so we have to generate funds and give it to the persons with disability, and in that way we will get the reward, we will get the incentives from all the organizations and that kind of perspective. And when we also like started engaging the other persons with disabilities, they were not accepting the disabilities. They thought like it needs to be fixed somewhere. But it was really like, it took us almost 2 decades to talk and change that mindset from the medical-based approach to the social perspective. And we talked that like disability is just a different lifestyle. How we create an enabling environment where they have the rehabilitation from the social perspective, where they have the engagement and a role to play in the society. And that was the point where we thought like it's not possible to talk alone in this sector about the disability. It's all the engagement of the local communities. Their understanding about disability needs to be changed. It was very unfortunate. Back in 2005, we were hit by a huge earthquake in Pakistan, and there was millions of people who lost their lives. And unfortunately, we didn't find a single person with disability who was alive after the earthquake in those areas. It was only those persons with persons who became disabled. There were 400 women who got spinal cord injuries. And at at that time, there was no space for them to go because they were not accepting their disability. And people, their families, they got their expensive things like gold, jewelry, and all that stuff, and they left their women with disabilities at home because they thought like it's not important for us. God will help them, or the people who are coming to rescue them, they will protect them. And at that time, it was really difficult situation to just to protect them, taking them out from there. And then we realized there is a huge gap that exists. In the policy level, there was not a single word about disability because they were like not even considered ever as a human being. So why we consider them as person with disability? We were just taking them as something burden or a special people or something like from the very different perspective. So they were not counted at that time. So that's why the policies and legislation were completely quiet on the disability response. And then when we talk about the financial allocations, the systematic changes, that was also not existing because of their unavailability of the data, how many of them are living, what kind of challenges they are facing, that all information was missing. And that's why the policies were also quiet on the disability response. Then we started this campaign that it's very important to have the visibility of person with disability. And it's not only in Pakistan, but when we connected with South Asia, we connected with the Asia Pacific region, and even on the global level, there were huge gaps that was existing at all levels to engage the persons with disability on equal level. We talk about the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. We talk about the CEDAW reforms where the woman overall is not like focusing on the leadership of women and girls with disability. So we have to review that as well. And at the same time, we talk about the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is the global agenda. Everyone is focusing, have the political will, and it's very important to include the disability in that. So at least for the mainstream organizations, the mainstream development corporations and all talk about the disability from that perspective. But again, like talking about the legislation policies is one aspect that is very important. But at the same time, how we mobilize the movements to work together. So we adopted overall on the regional level and on the global level and in the country level, the twin track approach. On one hand, we have to mobilize and empower persons with disability who can get affiliated with the communities at the grassroots level. So they are connected with each other, understanding their disabilities, accepting their disabilities, and then they came out of their homes to talk about that agenda of the disability from the human rights perspective, from the social perspective. And that was the point where we connected with the service provider. Then we realized, okay, the structures are there, all the systems are there, but that's not accessible. So how we train the police department, how we train the service providers, the GBV codes, all those systems, and create that referral pathways and the responsive, accessible system. So at least if someone want to talk about the disability, want to talk about their rights, how they will get access to those services. So that initiative, it took us very long, but it was the best model where we connected and created that inclusive referral pathways of the service provided at the grassroots level. And that was a community-based inclusive development model, which we have shared, created by persons with disabilities and all the community members from the grassroots. And on the other hand, we work closely with the government officials, with the State Department, with the legislation reform policies holders, like how they think about making the systematic changes to include those persons with disabilities who are taking the initiatives, who are coming out of their homes, how they can contribute in that discourse. And that was the point where we have to engage everyone and sit on one table and talk about the disability agenda in the development discourse. And where we have talked about the policy reforms, where we talk about the strategic plannings, the budgetary allocations, and also engaging the real voices of organizations of persons with disability. So at least they can share their experiences, they can talk about their challenges and how we are connected that. The third very important aspect which we have taken in the overall work which we have done was more focused on the networking and the collaboration at all levels. Because what we experience from different platforms, that if we talk about the gender-based violence against women and girls with disability, there was no support mechanism that was available. So how we provide the psychosocial support, how we connect with them to get the information on providing that support to other persons with disability. On the regional level, it was also very important to talk from the legislation reform, but talking about the UN and international organizations agenda, the academic institutes, how they are taking from the students' perspective, because most of the researches are only happened from the gender, like more on the social perspective, but not in the role of persons with disabilities in the development agenda. So that was the point where we all work together and bring that perspective to the organizations of persons with disability, so they can start defining their roles, their engagements, and how they can influence the overall policy reform, how they can influence the overall implementations of the work. It was really interesting, like when we were talking about the disability in a very basic community level discussions, and they thought like it's just a punishment from God, and we are not taking that as a human rights or just a diversity aspect or intersectionality aspect. We were just taking it as a obligation or stereotype, and how we think of going out of the home. Even for myself, like I have a disability, and when I go out talking to other women, they felt like we are the only one in this world who have the disability, and they were not meeting with anyone, they were not having their social life, women are not getting married, they don't have their families, so how they will survive in this world, and what kind of opportunities they are getting. So in that agenda, we talked about the inclusivity, we talked about the intersectionality, we talk about the engagement of persons with disabilities at all levels. And that was the huge impact on the implementation of the sustainable development goals. And that created the huge impact on the legislation reform. But now it's time for us to work together, how the young people can play their role and talk about more of the diversity, acceptance, and especially enjoying the different lifestyle. Because for me and for my colleagues, it's like disability is an honor for us, and we are very happy to have our disabilities, but it needs recognition, it needs proper implementation where we have equal access to the services, equal access to enjoy our life, equal access to have that life where we can contribute to the overall development. Thank you. And if you have any questions, please.
Thank you very much, Abia. So I would welcome questions in the chat, and please go ahead. And I can also get us started. Abia, if you could keep your camera on, because we'll be coming to you. I'm interested to hear more about your work in the promotion of including persons with disabilities in the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm not sure if you know this, but Queen's is an institution that that is very much striving towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And actually, that's how I first came to be aware of you, was in that space when you were advocating at the UN for inclusion of persons with disabilities in the SDGs. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about that work and what you see needs to be done in the future.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. This is very important because when we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, at that time, we were meeting with the state representatives, we were meeting with the personnel, like all the permanent missions in the US, in the European Parliamentarian, in many of the countries, because Sustainable Development Goals, when we heard first time, people were thinking it's only the role of the developing or the global south, their agenda to develop, but it's not. It's the agenda for all over the world. And we have witnessed during the COVID response, it was a huge fail that nobody was prepared to respond to the COVID. And at the same time, the health system was badly effective. Though we were trying to reach to the Sustainable Development Goal from the health perspective, from the education, employment, in all these sectors. But the reason was the real voices of persons with disabilities were never been included. They were not reached out at the grassroots level to share their experiences, their knowledge. So when we were talking with the state representative, we bring that into the main agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 11 references on disability, and they talk greatly about the data, about the employment, education in each sector of talking of when we talk about the leaving no one behind, it means no one, like how we will engage the furthest behind people who are not reaching out, who are not like having their voices in all the processes. So that was the advocacy point which we have taken for the Sustainable Development Goals. And recently in the SDG Summit also, we highlighted with the Secretary General the importance of including the voices and engagement of persons with disability individually and their organization, because they have very critical role to play. So that was the entering point for the Sustainable Development Goals. And parallelly, we are working one-to-one meetings with the state representatives on the regional level through the Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development Goals. African region have their own roadmap. So we are trying to contribute on the regional level, and at the same time on the national level, when we have the VNR, the voluntary national reports, at that time we make sure that government official report have the findings of the persons with disabilities, their challenges are incorporated in the report. So at least they have the knowledge and the understanding how to respond to that. What are the important aspects of presenting that? So these are all the process which required. It's not only one-time advocacy on the global level, but it needs a lot of effort at the grassroots, at the community level. So at least we can push the real examples of persons with disabilities, how they are contributing at the grassroots level, what are the challenges they are facing, and how practically we can address that. So that was the point where we are focusing still. And now we are engaging the young people through the Equal World campaign of Sight Savers, through other initiatives, the Global Forum on the Leadership of Women with Disability. We have taken all that, and now we are having the Summit for the Future, in which we are also trying to address that. So we have all those platforms where we can push the agenda of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in a practical way. Sorry.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful. And some questions are starting to roll through in the chat. So this is wonderful. So I'll be pulling them up as we go. So the first question is from Mary Jackson, who asks, is there one country that you believe is ahead of others in supporting the SDGs? Or your goals, the goals of disability inclusion, perhaps, or inclusion of persons with disabilities in the goals?
Yeah, I think this is very like the key of the implementation of the sustainable development goals and bringing them back on the track. If you are engaging others, all the communities, if you talk about the intersectionality approach, if we're talking about the other engagement of the stakeholders, that's the key point of real implementation, because we cannot do everything in isolation. The Global 17 is very clearly like mentioning how we engage with the stakeholders, UN, government, international organizations, and especially the role of the grassroots level civil society organizations. If you engage them and provide the platform to talk about it, that will really give them more space to implement and collectively take the actions.
Thank you. The next question is from Molly Flindle Hannah, who asks, what advice would you give to someone with a disability who fears sharing their condition due to stigma in society or at work? What supports exist?
I think this is the main cause, that we still not finding persons with disability visibly in our societies because of this stigma, and that's the huge challenge that everyone is facing. But for my personal experience, when you accept the diversity, when you think about, disability in a positive way, then you will be able to change the mindset of the other people. Because just like experience, my colleagues and everyone, they ask, what happened to you? What's wrong with you? Every time I go outside, they ask me, what happened to you? So we have to respond millions of people that I'm okay, I don't have any problem, nothing wrong with me. But again, like, we have this understanding because we are very much connected to the people who have the same kind of, physical appearances, and how the way they talk, they want to reach out. So this is the point where we need to engage the media about the positive aspect of disability, where we need to engage young students who are doing the researches, and they use the good examples of persons with disability, showcase them, their studies, their case studies, and highlight their profiles, because that's the most important thing. And also recognizing person first and then their disability. So if you use the right terminology, persons with disability, that will also help to understand the importance of a person in the society to get engaged, and how we change that mindset about the negativity about disability. I just like take an example. One earlier in our age, we were saying downloading. So downloading now in this recent context is about just downloading something from the computer or laptop. But previously it was downloading from the truck or some heavy stuff from there. So now the mindset is completely changed. And I just take another example. How many of you use the wheelchair? I asked in my trainings many people, how many of you use the wheelchair? And mostly the response is, no, we don't use the wheelchair. But I just tell them, you came here in a car that has a chair and the wheels. So everyone uses the wheelchair, but your requirements are different and my requirement is different. I'm using wheelchair in my room. So that's the enabling environment, and everyone have the different needs. So it's not the physical thing, that one person's identity, it's an overall society that we can change. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is from Getachew Tadesse, and it's a two-part question. So he says, thank you very much for your contribution to disability inclusion globally. My question is, what is your recommendation for persons with disabilities to be the driving force for disability inclusion? How? And then second, what is your reaction on the practical implementation of the UNCRPD in the Global South and the Global North? Can we really say it is serving all equally?
Yeah, I'll just take the response from the second part, because CRPD implementation, mostly just people take it as a document and, just signing ratification is fine. It happened the same in our country. When the government signed, we were very happy, at least they have signed. And after that, they ratified, and then the file was closed, because that's the only thing most of the governments have done. And they felt like it's very important to talk about the implementation from the global south and also global north, like what are the local policies we are using, because we always say if you have the policy without teeth, you cannot bite, and if you don't bite, you cannot get the actual results. So it's very important to talk about the national level legislations which are based on the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, and reflecting the proper strategies of the implementation. And it's all about engaging the line ministries, engaging the relevant departments to implement the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. If you have the legislation, definitely we need to work on the protocols, on the rules of businesses. Then you talk with the finance ministry, you talk about the housing ministry, all those in line ministries, to make a practical strategy. And another challenge which we are facing is about the role of persons with disability, and their organizations are mostly missing. So we have to give the platforms to them to talk about their rights. We have created the special advisory committee to the National Assembly of Pakistan. We also developed the Aging Disability Diversity Task Force within the humanitarian response context. We work closely with the government officials, so make them, responsible, but at the same time, take your own responsibility. If you don't highlight what are the challenges you are facing, then it won't be possible to make and achieve that results. So it's very important from both sides that it's a important aspect to talk about the disability rights, but at the same time implementation. And the first thing you ask about the engaging of like the conditions for people with disabilities, how they feel about their disabilities. I think it's very important to engage them, create the sustainable platforms in them. Empowering is not enough, because we have witnessed many women with disabilities, when we empower them, they don't want to stay back and there is no place to go for them. So how we are creating the sustainable platforms for them, engaging them through employment opportunities, engaging them from all that aspects, so at least they have a voice, they have a life where they can contribute. And the only solution again is community-based inclusive development.
Thank you. Our next question is from Anne Marie, who says, do you think that women with disabilities have a double burden in our society, being a woman and being a person with a disability? And what can we do specifically to empower women with disability?
Yeah. Women with disabilities, like that's the main focus of my work from last 20 years, because being a woman with disability from the global south, it was really challenging to work about them, because they are the one who are first sexually harassed, facing gender-based violence. They're not having all those opportunities to work as a leader in the gender movement and in the disability movement. Both, they are excluded. And that was the point where we talk about the engagement of women and girls with disabilities at all levels again, and giving them more space. And especially for women and girls with disability, when we talk from our experience, we link it with the CEDAW Beijing platform, we link it with all those international by legal response documents, but again, practically how you are engaging them in the work, what kind of family support we are providing, because sometimes it's hugely like discriminated because of their culture, religion, all those diversity aspects. So we really need to think what support they require, how we are engaging and having a protection mechanisms. We have safe space for women with disability to contribute and also have a voice in their leadership discourses. That's why I always talk like from the gender disability. It's really important to connect those dots and what practical strategies we are giving to women and girls with disability to explore their own leadership, their own role, and how important it is for them to be engaged in all that aspect to take the leadership role. Because if you are just giving the opportunity, supporting them, they are very comfortable with that, but they have to bring themselves out of those comfort zone to talk about the other women with disabilities who are just confined in their homes. They are just living life as prisoners. So how we can bring those opportunities for those women with disability, so at least they can explore, they can come out and provide that role they have to play.
Thank you. The next question relates to, oh, sorry, my video. There we go. So the next question relates to your assessment of, or your evaluation of how conditions for persons with disabilities, especially in the Global South, have improved by, as a role, because of the UNCRPD and the role played by disability activists and all that. That question's from Desalegn.
Yeah, from the health condition, I would talk more from the perspective of the sexual health and reproductive rights of women and girls with disability, the gender-based violence, and again, access to the services, because our hospitals, just example of a deaf woman going to the hospital, talking about her problems, and they just focus on her disability. They will never thought like why she is here. She's talking about the sexual harassment of her daughter, but they will focus on her deafness or her disability. So how she could access those services, how she can explain to them. Again, the situation which women and girls with disabilities faced is having their own personal life, their sexual life, and that's not existing anywhere because the staff and the systems are not existing. The helplines are not accessible. The doctors don't have understanding about disability. It was very unfortunate during the recent floods in Pakistan. There was forced sterilization of women and girls with disability because they were sexually harassed. A woman, she was having intellectual disability and she got pregnant 3 times. And when she went to the hospital, they said only solution is to have the forced sterilization. We cannot help you more. So the families have to take that step, which is not acceptable because we don't have ever a choice that having a family or something. So in the health sector, it's really need to get engaged with the organizations of persons with disabilities again, with the assistive devices even that's not easily available. So if the humanitarian response or anything happened, then they are not able to access those services. Then again, there is no shelters, there is no protection systems that are available to provide them support. If we talk about the e-health services, that's again not accessible for the blind people, for the low vision, all those, like what kind of services you are providing to them to access that. So this was the gaps that which we have find out, but again, there are a lot of good examples as well. We have to take that on board. We have developed the mobile application, which was accessible, equal access, where people can get access to the health services, they can access to the education, employment, all those services in the accessible formats. But the point is how the government is taking those initiatives, because if the corporate sector, individual organizations, they will take the initiatives, but for a time being and for limited areas as well. but after some time, it will be difficult to manage the whole country, whole region globally. So we need some practices to share with the other stakeholders, with the universities to do the research on the good practices and provide that information to the state representatives to take it as a ventures for their implementation plan of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, because the Conference of the State Parties is a platform where everyone sit together. So in those platforms, we need to present these research-based, evidence-based good practices, so at least the governments can take those as a mandatory initiatives for their implementation plans.
Thank you very much. The next question comes from Sandra Denotter, who is also our Vice Provost Global Engagement here at Queen's. And she says, thank you for a wonderful talk. My question relates to SDG 17, which, as you know, is Partnership for the Goals. Do you have recommendations about how to best facilitate partnerships to advance disability inclusion embedded in the goals, including partnerships across international borders?
Yeah. Thank you. I think this was the most important one, because I always talk about the networking, collaboration, because it's, again, without the goal 17, I think we are not able to achieve much. And it's really important how in the implementation of the goal 17, we have clear indication or clear roles of those organizations who are taking disability as their mandate. Because it's not, if we think about the disability as a separate agenda, if we talk about the woman in a separate agenda, that is not going to work. So for those recommendations, the policy briefs with the Sustainable Development Goals, we are working closely with the State Department. We also working closely with the Pact for the Future, that how we can incorporate those recommendations to talk about the disability inclusion in the Goal 17 implementation. And we are really, like, it was not good, like after all those conversations, again, the Pact for the Future declaration have missed out the word disability. So it's again a huge platform for us for advocacy, for all the stakeholders to work together. So at least we'll make sure in that co-facilitators platform, we have the voices of persons with disabilities that are including for the implementation of the Goal 17, and also practically how we are moving on the countries and the regional level as well. We have to like create those smaller platforms. For example, in the regional level, the Asia Pacific Regional Mechanism of Civil Society Organization is working. In that, we have included the disability constituency as one of the main stakeholders. So at least they can advise the other constituencies on disability. When we talk about the climate change, we engage like all those humanitarian response, DRR, in all that aspects, we are taking disability into their agendas. So they have a collective voices and they have the plan to implement. And again, very important role of young people with disabilities, with diverse disabilities, with all their intersectionalities. If we talk about transgender with disability, older people with disability, all that aspects need to be highlighted in our discussions and included.
Thank you. The next question I have is from Ansha, who says, thank you for the wonderful talk. If you would give one key message for individuals who don't identify themselves as a person with a disability, what would that key message be?
Sorry, I didn't get the question again. Can you individual?
Sure. So what would be your one key message for people who don't identify as persons with disabilities? What would that key message be as it relates to your work?
Yeah, for the non-disabled or so-called non-disabled people, it's really all who don't name themselves as a person with disability. I think it's all about just contribution. If you just think about your own career, your own work, your own life, then you won't be able to achieve much, because everyone in this world think about themselves. We have to think about those who are really struggling in their lives, who don't have opportunities like us to study, to have the opportunity to contribute, to work, families, all those things are missing in their lives. We are talking about 1 billion of people with disabilities. We are not talking about a smaller number who are invisible. It's a huge number that we are not finding them in the communities, in our development sector, in our corporate sector, completely missing. So it's very important to think about them, how we can create that opportunities for them, how we can bring them more voices and also platforms where they can contribute. And it's about like giving the equal opportunities, creating our environments that more accessible and how they can contribute, but at the same time thinking about your own, initiatives need to, how you can create more inclusive.
Thank you. And the next question is coming from a comment from Mary, who reflected about how it might be challenging to include all types of persons, all types of disability in your work. So could you talk a little bit about different types of disability and how those different types have or have not been included in the advocacy work that you've done?
Yeah. For us, like when we started our work in 97, so at that time it was only, we were like only organization in Pakistan to talk about the disability rights, and then we get connected, we build the capacities of other self-help groups, and now we have more than 55 organizations on a very diversified aspects they are working. On the regional level, we have established the South Asia Disability Forum. On the Asia Pacific level, I've established the Asia Pacific Women with Disability Network. And then on the global level also, we are working on the Global Forum on the Leadership of Women and Girls with Disability. The main aspect of developing these platforms was to making sure all the diversities of the disabilities are included. Unfortunately, we work with very little visibility of the intellectual disabilities, or because they have overprotection kind of systems. If you want to work with them, their families, they don't trust on the system of response, because if they find lost something and how they will reach out, so the protection system is very much like counted. And again, if we talk about the intellectual women with disability, that's another layer of the discrimination. So it's very challenging to engage them, work with them, but we are trying our best, like how we can reach out to those women as well. And again, in all the aspects of their diversity, we are trying to engage with their own advocacy platforms. So they share what they need, how we can engage them. It's not just a normal organization, like you open the call for the job and people will come up with their qualifications and that's it. They have decades of experience of their own disabilities. So we are counting them, how we are bringing the knowledge from their experiences of the disability. They have the whole experience of living a single day with a disability is a unique experience. So we have to bring those voices. We are still struggling to engage the deafblind, because in Pakistan we don't have any support system. There is no education institute where they are teaching deaf, blind, or other people who have the multiple disabilities. So these are the points where we really working together. And thank you so much for highlighting this, because we are continuously advocating about this point. Like, we don't need only the people who have the visible disability, but those who are not having the visible disabilities, how to address that, how to make sure they are also getting equal access to the services.
Thank you, Abia. The next question is from Stephanie, who asks, what do you see as the specific role for universities in the work that you do?
Universities, I believe the most important one, because for my all career of education, when I started in the school, I started from the special education center. And then when I moved to the mainstream school, because there was no space for the education, and I went to the mainstream school, and I was really struggling, and I fighted with my parents and came back to Pakistan, and again studied in the special education center, because I was not feeling comfortable in the mainstream school. The systems were not aligned with the needs of persons with disabilities. Teachers were not trained, but it took me quite a long time to advocate and understand myself, like it is important to study in the mainstream university or the school, because special education is not available everywhere and not for everyone. So we went to the mainstream school, we teach the teachers and advocate about our rights, about our needs, the washrooms and infrastructural changes. That's the one thing which don't exist in the developing countries. The second most important aspect is about teachers' trainings. The third about the curriculum which they are using for all the diversified um, disabilities. And again, when I studied in University of Warwick in UK, at that time it was a really different experience, because then you get to know about the disability support system that are existing. So what first thing I did after coming back to Pakistan, I connected those universities with the universities of Pakistan to have the connections and share that experience, how you are providing the reasonable accommodation to person with disabilities, how you're engaging them, how you're changing your systems according to the needs of women and girls with disability, the safe space they need. There are always the washrooms which are accessible for men or women, like only disabled one washroom. So what are the needs of women and girls with disability? How you're gender sensitive, creating that space for women with disabilities as well. So we talked about all those aspects. I think universities have very important role in research. The students don't have specific courses on disability. So if you talk about community-based inclusive development, this should be treated as a course. For research as well, for their dissertations, the student can take that topics on the disability research, and we need to bring the interest of the young students on the disability as a different discourse. It's not always about the issue or the challenge. Disability is a complete uh, a learning experience, and also have a very unique aspects in it. So how we are taking that as a development course for the disability inclusion. And thirdly, universities can also play a very important role in the data in sexual health and reproductive rights of women and girls with disability, what kind of support they are providing. And we have that important influence on the policy and the legislation from the academic perspective. And there is an important need of coalition between the universities of all the countries, so they can provide support to the developing countries, they can provide support to the students who are not able to study for the higher education. So what kind of flexible roles they are playing for them and all. Yeah. So this is just my own understanding from my experience, but I think, yeah.
Thank you very much. So we just have time for one final question, I believe. And this one is that from Stephanie, a second point to her question is a lesson that she keeps learning from disability advocates is the role of arts and joy and creativity in this work. Can you give us any final reflections on that before we end the session today?
Yeah. Disability, again, I felt like it's again important to accept the disability as a different lifestyle, how you're managing it, how you are celebrating it. It's not something like you have to feel bad about disability. We have to change that whole discourse about disability, and that gives the opportunity to learn, to share, and how you can change that. Just one example, like my brother is also having a disability. He was going in a car, and the taxi driver was keep asking him, "What happened to you? Have you consulted with the doctor?" And he was saying, "Yes, I did." And after that, when he was leaving from the car, he asked the taxi driver, "What happened to you? Have you consulted with the doctor?" And he was like, "Why you're asking me?" He said, "Your height is quite long, so I thought you have to consult with the doctor." So then the taxi driver said, "We always think like we are the Superman and try to find the difficulties or the challenges to the other person." So we have to accept that everyone have a different perspective, different needs, and how we create that enabling environment where we are not focusing on the individual's physical appearances. These buildings, environment we have created, and we have made the mistakes. So how we can make them more accessible so people can enjoy their diversity, celebrate it, and live a dignified life, which is the most important one. And many of the persons with disability are not enjoying their dignity just because of the barriers they are facing.
Thank you so much. Well, this is the end of the time that we do have available for the Pete Lecture today. So thank you so much, Abia, for an engaging talk, and to the audience for joining us today and for your really engaging, important questions as well. I'd like to thank once again the family and friends of Dr. Malcolm Peete and the donors of the Dr. Malcolm Peete Lectureship Fund. I'd also like to thank Tom Collier from the ICACBR and Nancy Hoganrad from QHS Advancement for organizing the event and making sure that it ran smoothly today. And we'll be providing a link in the chat for anyone who would like to donate to this fund so that we might continue to hold these wonderful lectures in the future. As a note, we are alternating virtual and in person. So we hope to hold the next Peete Lectureship in person around this time next year. And as a final note, once this event ends, we will contact you with a short survey for feedback about the event. And you'll also receive a follow-up email that will provide the link to the recording of the session today. So thank you everyone for joining us, and depending on where you are in the world, I hope you have a great day or a lovely evening. And thank you again, Abia. It was a true honor to have you join us today. Thanks everyone. Bye now.
Thank you.